Hello everyone, this is B Bell and welcome back to another episode of Blender Files. If you are not sure or if you don't know exactly what Blender Files is, it is a video series that I do every once in a while to kind of showcase some of my earlier models that I have been there we go. Earlier models that I have actually tried to attempt to have make, and for whatever reason I have either stopped them, abandoned them, or put them on hold. So we're starting off with the Akira class. I mean, but this is not necessarily a Blender file ship. It's just this happened to be the ship that I've been working on when I finally went ahead and made the decision of which particular model that I'm going to be going through next. I've kind of found an old hard drive of mine where I'd gone through and found a whole bunch of old models, and so I felt like I'm going to go ahead and show those to y'all. I've already done some of the Ascension class, the Daedalus class, a non-Star Trek, um, you know, uh, Gundam model, and I got a couple of other things that I plan on doing down the line. But today we're going to be looking at a ship that doesn't actually fit the so-called guidelines that I've kind of put into place. This particular ship is actually not an abandoned model. I mean, it is still a work in progress. So let's go ahead and, I mean, this particular ship is actually a ship that I've been working on for some time, and I'm almost, it's almost in completion, really. So it's almost to a point to where I'm actually going to release this ship, but still, I didn't do any kind of tutorial on it, and I haven't done any other videos on it, but I've talked about it in detail on some of my videos. So decided I'll go ahead and kind of show that off today. And eventually this will be a model that I will release on some, you know, uh, 3D forums for download and what have you. So let's go ahead and cut out of this and jump into Blender, into another Blender file where we will talk about or the ship that we're going to be doing today. So give me a minute. And everyone, I present to you the Andor class vessel. If you are not familiar with what this type of vessel is, this is not a original design, though it has some of my own influences on the look of the ship. This is actually a ship that was featured in a kind of a strategy game that came out back in the 70s called FASA. It was, once again, it was like a strategy game similar along the lines of Dungeons and Dragons and things, but it was dealing with Starfleet ships. There was a whole bunch of different ship designs that were designed for this particular game, and the Endor class was one of them. It does look a little bit kit bashy, and that's, because of the nature of the ship, that at the time when this game came out, there wasn't really, actually it wasn't probably the 70s. It might have been in the 80s. I have to go back and look. I probably should have done a little bit more research to kind of freshen up on my knowledge before I went ahead and started looking at or started doing this episode. But there was no, it had to have been the 80s because but at the time they only had three Federation ships. During the movies, this was based kind of in the movie era. It was the Constitution, the Miranda, the Ober, so there was actually four, and the Excelsior class. Of course, so I think there was like another version that was released a little bit later, and that had the Excelsior class variations of these ships inside it. But the Endor was one that was kind of a favorite. A lot of the ships didn't really have any kind of rhyme or reason behind it. They looked very kit bashy and looked very flimsy or what have you. But they this particular ship was one that was very popular. There was a couple of other ships that were popular, and I might do those as well. But let's go ahead and go into some of the history of this particular type of ship. It is called the Andor class because this particular ship design was heavily influenced by Andorian engineers. The Andorian part, I'm guessing, is this entire section here. was primarily Andorian, and also they said the interiors was also of Andorian influence. And because of that, a lot of Andorian officers tend to want to favor to serve on these particular type of vessels. This particular ship has its own history, which we'll go into in just a little bit. It primarily was used as kind of a weapons platform for the new and improved photon torpedoes that showed up inside the movies. And with that, there was a total of 12 torpedo launchers scattered throughout the ship. The placements of those, I kind of guessed myself of where they would have been, because as you'll see, the picture doesn't really show a whole lot of exactly where those torpedo launchers should have been, but I've kind of guessed at it. And so I kind of placed mine to where you'd have one, you know, on the secondary hull, there was one on each side, very reminiscent to the Constitution class. Then there was two more facing forward on this particular section here, which was the torpedo carrier area, and also is the carry the conduits going from the engine room in the secondary hull to the nacelles, which was off in the back. So there were two forward facing on each side, so that's four. So we got six. And then there were two side facing ones, one on each side. And then you had two rear facing ones right back that I put back here so it could fire torpedoes as it's moving away. So it was a total of 12. And it would carry more torpedoes with it than any other ship because, once again, this particular section here was primarily for carrying the torpedoes and for all the torpedo launchers, the torpedoes, and once again also all the conduits and stuff that would run from the in secondary hull to the nacelles. That, I believe, is pretty much the canonical. Once again, I probably should have done a little bit more research on the matter. Let's go ahead and kind of go through and take a look at the different little orthos from the top, the front, the side. Now, the reason about why I started doing this ship is, now I mentioned this before in a couple of episodes, is that there were some videos that are watching some people that were doing some Starship reviews, and they were talking about this particular ship, and they said that they would love to have a model for it. So I felt like, well, you know what? I actually kind of like this design myself. I mean, it's the first time I've seen it, but I kind of like it. So let me go ahead, and then I decided to tackle it. I didn't tell the people that I was going to tackle it. I was just going to make it and then send it to them. And eventually I did send them screenshots of the almost finished picture and saying, hey, if y'all want the model, y'all can have it. Never heard back from them, and they did a more detailed video of this ship. So I guess at that point in time, they decided that I figured that they probably really didn't need mine. So I just kind of left it alone for a while, but then decided to go back to it because I wanted to really finish this because I put a lot of time into it. So this is going to be kind of my interpretation and my version of the FASA ship. The reason why I say it's my version of it is because there was actually several different versions of this ship. Well, not several, but there were really only three different versions of the ship that you could probably see. Maybe four could be kind of argued. One of those versions, of course, is the version, if we go into the side view here, let's go into this rear view and we go ahead and remove all of these layers, was the drawing that was in the actual manual that you would get, the actual book. Now, this is where these orthos came from, and this is predominantly where I've gotten my influence for the design from. Um, Now, another version of it it's more of a variation, and I'll go back into more about how I think it could be considered a variation, but more of a configuration. Is that this bottom portion here and these nacelles back here were of Excelsior variants. So it was more of an Excelsior style secondary hull with some changes. It wasn't directly a kit bash, and the nacelles was also a Excelsior variation. Now, the third variation of this ship actually kind of comes into play with the figurine. Um, when you get when you play FASA, I believe that you were able to get figurines of all the different class ships or some of the different class ships, similar to how like when Warhammer 40K, you can get figurines to use for when you're playing the game. It was a similar thing. So the Endor did have a figurine that kind of came, or not kind of, it that came out for the game for FASA, and that right there in itself looks remarkably different from what was portrayed the within the pictures themselves. First off, it made it to where this hull section here, if I bring back up the model quick, where this hull section here was a lot more integrated into the hull section, almost to the point to where it was something similar to like that right there. So it didn't really match up with what was seen here on the original drawings. It almost looked like to where, you obviously what happened is you had the person that drew the drawings that designed the ship, and then you had somebody that made the models, and they may have only went either they only had the top portion to go by because the toy did look remarkably like the top portion of the ship, or they were having such great difficulty trying to design the whole ship as the whole ship, and so they just kind of just went with their own look, um, to try to match as much as possible, but trying to take a two-dimensional sketch and put it into three-dimension. But the toy looked remarkably different from what was actually seen, inside the actual FASA book. So that is almost a third variation, but I'm kind of hesitant to call that a variation because with such a change like that is almost, even though it had similar, you know, design looks, it almost was a completely different ship, or at least to me it was. Because it shared similar design features doesn't necessarily make it, its own unique vessel. So that's the third. Now the fourth, I just say very lightly, and this is more of a, once again, I kind of consider reconfiguration, is if you look at this top portion, there's no evidence that there is a secondary hull, so there might be a variation. And I've seen some models and that other people have done of the Andor class vessel where they exclude that secondary hull completely. Now, with that being said, we move on into this particular ship in itself, which is, the one that I designed. Where when I'm designing things, I tend to always try to keep in the back of my mind little backstories of the ship, where it's been, what its purpose is, and I do that with everything. I'm designing a character, I come up with a backstory, design a ship, come up with a backstory, and everything. Now, for me, the Andor class, and this is, once again, this is just my interpretation of the design. It is not the canonical interpretation of the design, is that the ship was designed from the ground up to have hot swappable parts. What I mean by that is the secondary hull could be hot swappable for different variations. You can use the actual secondary hull that you see here. You can get a different secondary hull that looks similar to it, but with different configurations for internal volume and stuff. You can do the Excelsior variation and put underneath that for different mission profiles, or you can actually, whoops, you can do away with that secondary hull completely and use another section here that houses the engine, the warp engine to supply power to the nacelles. And also plus you can swap out this portion, oops, sorry, this portion here. This could also be swapped out as well to where you have this configuration here, which is currently set up for, once again, the photon torpedo launchers. But if you don't want that, you can also bring in another model, which I'm working on right here, which would be more of a shuttle carrier, to where most of the internal volume is now rigged for carrying shuttles, and this would be where they would dock and launch and everything like that. So if you needed to transport shuttles, let's say to another station or to a ship or what have you, you can just quickly just swap it out, put in a new section. And with that also being said, you can also swap out the nacelles, and You can also swap out the bridge. The only thing that would not be swapped out, because it is the part of the ship that actually carries the designation, would be the saucer section. I look at it similar to kind of like an 18 wheeler. The front cab is the actual truck, and the trailer is just that's swapped out depending on what it's carrying, a flatbed or a box truck, or whatever it needs to carry, that's what it will carry. So it could be swapped out, and that's why I kind of was saying with the as far as the Excelsior variation and this variation that is built more on the top, it's more of just configurations rather than complete variations of the ship. This top portion here is a representation of the variation minus the secondary hull. So if you don't want to carry the secondary hull for whatever reason, uh, but if you do need a secondary hull, you can throw it back in. And the Excelsior variation is just, minus the Excelsior, it's just there to extend the life of the vessel as far as the technology is concerned. They add in you know, a different secondary hull that might, because maybe the engines, the warp engine for the Excelsior is much, much bigger than what could be fit comfortably inside the secondary hull. So they use an Excelsior style secondary hull with Excelsior style nacelles to kind of lengthen the usefulness of this style of ship. They could still use this to swap out bridge module and so on and so forth. So that's why I say there's probably really only, you know, two variations, but one of the variations carries multiple different configurations, because this is built into this, you probably have less configurations except for the subtraction of the secondary hull. Now, this particular ship right here, and I'm going to go into material mode to kind of show you all the materials, and let's also get rid of, there we go, get rid of those lights, is the USS Shran. In my own little backstory with it is that the USS Shran was the second ship, that was the second Andorian class vessel after the USS Andor. And the Shran, that's if y'all watched Star Trek Enterprise, Shran was the Andorian captain that kind of made friends, the closest you could probably say that maybe they could, you know, actually, I think he did call him a friend, but he was the Andorian captain that you saw played by Jeffrey Combs in Star Trek Enterprise. So this ship was named after him because in Star Trek Enterprise, obviously Shran played a big part in not only that story and the Xindi, um, the Xindi battle, but also in the formation of the Federation almost to a certain degree. So this was named after him. And NCC 1972, I can't remember exactly where I got the 1972 from. Um, yeah, I don't remember where I got the 72 from. I can't remember if that was the first release of the FASA, or maybe I just pulled it out of my head. I can't remember exactly. But that's where, but the USS Shran comes within this default configuration where it is set up for border patrol along the hostile borders, especially with the Romulan border. That's why they have all the photon torpedo launchers, you know, to it, because it's not set up for a lot of scientific exploration except for just minor exploration that needs to be done during its patrols. But if there is ever a situation where they need a quick response with a whole lot of weapons, then they send in this particular type of ship. So it comes with that configuration. With that being said, the engineering section is down into the secondary hull section, and everything is relayed into the warp nacelles. Now, with this particular ship in general as a whole, you can see that I've kind of met up with a lot of I use this tremendously for reference placement of some of the windows and things like that, but there was a lot of stuff that I had to kind of integrate in that the picture didn't show, such as the 4 torpedo launchers. We were supposed to have 12 torpedoes, but I had difficulty counting of where those torpedo launchers would be on the ship, so I put 2 on, or 4 forward-facing torpedo launchers here, plus 2 on the secondary hull. So That was kind of my interpretation. There wasn't a really of a bottom look, so all of this was completely interpreted by me, trying to kind of going back and forth with the Miranda class vessel on how the bottom portion looked on that to kind of give me the idea of some of these little grill details and all details that you see here for a variety of different reasons. These little panels here, oops, sorry, right here was designed for physical fast loading and unloading of the photon torpedoes. Uh, didn't see a back area, so I kind of interpreted that this secondary hull, of course, was going to have the primary shuttle bay on it. And then there were these back sensor pallets to give the ship better sensors from the, better sensors, from the rear. It does have forward-facing sensors, but better sensors of the rear. I kind of went with a look to where in my story, this ship was designed after the Constitution class, so it's utilizing Constitution class components that have been tried and true, but just before the Excelsior, which is why the Excelsior uh, secondary hull and nacelles was later additions onto future versions of this vessel or future configurations of the vessel, once again to extend the life, the usefulness of this vessel. So I kind of went in like right here using that little fin grill detail that you see on the Excelsior model. So I kind of threw that inside there. You see a very subtle look of it in the Constitution, but I expanded it out more to kind of show once again, a bit of a kind of a bridge between the Constitution and the Excelsior class variations. So as they started putting in these grills for whatever reason, I can't remember what their usefulness is for, but they integrated into this and then they expanded it out. Couldn't see what type of neck was used to connect all of it together, so I went with a Constitution class neck. And the textures, for the most part, is pretty much done. I mean, actually, this ship, except for the shuttle carrier variation, is, I have to say probably about 90% done. There's still some texture details that I want to try to put in, expand. Like this hull detail here is not quite straight. It's not looking very, you know, Polish detail because it's going off in a 45-degree angle. I want to try to straighten that out to make it look more like it's, along the, X and Y coordinates here. Probably move the Aztec hull details, spread that out a little bit more along the ship and give some extra texture details to the nacelles. And as far as modeling is concerned, I want to kind of go through and clean up the model a little bit, add in some little details in areas that feel like they're a little bit bland, such as right back into here. Maybe even put a couple of windows back in this area here. Once again, I feel like I have like you know full control of what I want to do here because you don't see the back portion of the ship here. Did I bring in those? Yeah, I did. Slide scan. Let's get rid of those. There we go. But other than that, I mean, it's pretty much almost done. So I'm thinking about going through and adding in the Excelsior variations of the nacelles and the secondary hull, but I haven't quite decided that yet. Let me finish the shuttle variation of the secondary hull. But yeah, that's what the history of the Shran is that it patrols the borders. It doesn't have a very fast speed. I know some people would, especially purists, would look at the configuration of the nacelles and say, "Hey, I absolutely hate that. That breaks almost every single rule that Roddenberry set in place." Not necessarily. Granted, it doesn't have the look that the Federation's vessels keep, but the nacelles do have direct line of sight of each other. And if you look at it from the front, you can see that they are not completely, the intakes are not completely blocked. You know, I mean, they're not. I think it's like 60%. They need to be seen. 60% open line of sight. To open space. It's not quite 60%, but they're not completely blocked. Now, it's probably the not most efficient method of placement of the nacelles, and with that, I kind of just go in and say that the ship doesn't have as fast of where's it at? There it goes. The ship doesn't quite have as fast as a response speed. It doesn't have a high warp. Normally it can travel at max of warp 8 for short periods of time, up to 4 hours, which can get it to a destination in a relative amount of time, but not clear across the Federation territory as fast as, let's say, a Constitution class ship. So that's one of the downfalls of the ship, which is probably why we don't see this particular design go out of the initial constructions of the Andor class vessels. Now here's the textures, as you can see, with the cycles rendering in. But some people don't quite like the design of the ship, but me particularly, I actually quite like it. I had my reservations when I first started working on it, but after looking at it, I really kind of started falling in love with the designs of this vessel. So, I mean, it just started just kind of just, you know, I just started liking it. It ended up becoming one of my favorite, oops, phone going off. It became rapidly probably one of my favorite uh, non-canonical but not fan-created starship designs. And I would really love to kind of see this design actually almost, I mean, make it actually into a series or an episode or something somewhere. I would like to see it, you know, um, on the big screen. And I would actually really would like to see it as almost kind of a 3D mod. I mean, actual physical model. And that part, well, you know what? That may actually be coming. We may actually see a physical model of this ship. We'll see how things go. But with that said, I'm going to go ahead and cut the episode uh, off right now. So once again, this is not an abandoned project by the least, but it's not quite finished yet. I still got some work to do, but when I get done with it, I'm going to definitely first I'm going to probably release a couple of my own image renders of the ship, but then I might actually release the actual model. So if anybody wants to use it for anything, or if they want to uh, they want to try to take a look at it and maybe come up with their own variations of it, they're more than welcome to. But tell me what y'all think about it. Do y'all like FASA ships? Do y'all like the Endor class vessel? Do you like my interpretation of the Endor class vessel? Just let me know what y'all probably think. What do y'all like about it? What do y'all hate about it? What would y'all change? You know, love to hear from y'all guys on this. So, with that being said, I just want to say thank you once again for watching. This is B Belt Dan, and this is Blender Files, and I will see you in the next episode.